For criminals, the world it's a globalized environment. From your home in any part of the world with internet access, you can attack a critical infrastructure. In today's world, the threat is coming into your jacket where your mobile phone is. It's reaching your children in their children's room.
Hello and welcome to Ahead of the Risk, a podcast series organized by AXA XL, where we are inviting global leaders, reinventing leadership, trust and decision-making in an increasing fragmented world. I am Xavier Veyry. I am the CEO of AXA XL for APAC and Europe, and I'm your host today. And I have the pleasure of welcoming Jürgen Stock, the former Secretary General of INTERPOL. Jürgen, thank you very much. Welcome here.
Thank you for the warm welcome.
So INTERPOL is the worldwide leader organization focusing on law enforcement, but also on interconnection and interconnectivity of different law enforcement organizations, making sure that basically the world is safer tomorrow, or the world is safer today than what it was yesterday. So thank you very much for being here. And in the next moments, you will share with us your strong expertise, strong experience, your decades of experience in law enforcement, in focusing, in fact, on basically cyber criminality, but also traditional, I would say, risk exposure that have been existing, and a lot of other different sort of topics. So thank you very much for sharing your experience, your expertise for us in this podcast today. So, Jürgen, let's start from framing the moment. We are in a situation where the world is changing, where there are a lot of different elements. We talk about polycrisis. Mm-hmm. So what are, for you, the key elements that leaders, business leaders, need to consider in the current environment?
Yeah, I mean, let's start by saying the world has always been changing. So there is nothing of a concern in a world that is changing. What perhaps currently is causing most of the concern is the speed in which we see the world changing. It is the appearance of several crisis situations at the same time. That's why we call it polycrisis. So the topics we are all aware about is the climate change, energy, food security, conflict, water supply, geopolitical tensions, and everything is coming at the same time. So this is maybe a way of complexity, a way of dynamics, which we perhaps have never seen before in this kind of density. We see new technology coming up. Again, in principle, nothing new. We always had new technologies coming up, but the speed now in innovation, new products coming up. We are still in an era of globalization, despite all the geopolitical discussions around that and fragmentation. But we are living on one planet. Most of these big topics are that big that no single country, no single region can deal with it. So it would require global cooperation. And that perhaps characterizes the current situation. So indeed, it's complex. We are facing a number of crisis situations at the same time. These crisis situations are somehow linked with each other, and that makes it, I think, really complicated to deal with it. And we means the global community, because many of these issues have a global dimension. And as the UN Secretary General was always saying, a global problem requires a global solution. And this is what the world needs currently.
So in this context of very complicated, multi-events, interconnected, the speed, and you've mentioned it, in fact, the acceleration of the speed that basically at which those elements are happening. What should be the key elements that business leaders should be equipped with in order to better anticipate and deal with those situations?
I think business leaders need to have a kind of cockpit with the instrument that would show the developments in these different areas, and maybe also illustrate and show the way in which these problems are connected with each other. So capturing the complexity of today's situation on a national, on a regional, on a global scale, I think this characterizes the challenge for business leaders. And developing a methodology, let's say, to manage these risks. First of all, to get all the information, to assess the risks, to do the necessary analysis, and to draw the conclusions from this analysis. I think this is the challenge, and that requires a new way, from my point of view, in preparing to deal with this information, with the results, and from that to decide how can I ensure as a business leader that my company, my business, or my administration remain successful also in the future. Dealing with this complexity, making sure as a business leader I have all the information, that I can capture the different perspectives to the information regarding the analysis. I think this is one of the challenges that maybe in the past it was quite easy. You had certain sources of information, and then you could draw your conclusions from that.
I specifically like the fact that you mentioned navigate in the uncertainties and navigate the uncertainties, because this is somewhere key and structuring and very important for any business decision that any business leader is taking. Yeah. But you are insisting a lot on information. So getting the information upfront quickly, making sure that this information is enriched, making sure that it's diverse so it can be analyzed and then potentially leads to the right decisions. Now, let's imagine you are sitting in front of a board risk committee and you engage with leaders around geopolitical tensions. So which would be today your number one item on your indicators, on your cockpit, that you would potentially, I would say, suggest any board member or any leader to bear in mind and to have in mind?
Allow me to give you an example from my environment first. So policing. So if we ask ourselves the question as police leaders, what are we going to do against the cyber security risks, cyber criminals, the so-called underground economy, we need to understand the current threat situation. If we see that only in Western countries, but also in the United States, perhaps only 10% of all the incidents are being reported to the police, and we are blind on 90% of all the incidents that are happening. So if I'm lacking a significant part of information to come to the right conclusions, I might have a problem, because maybe my decisions are based on only 10%, and these 10% are not representative for the whole situation. So a business leader has to make sure that he or she has the full spectrum of information, which means that the information is maybe coming from different sources. So no longer just from your own team, but maybe from partners, maybe from a political level, maybe from scientific work. So the diversity needs to be reflected in the way in which boards, CEOs are managing the complexity of today's situation. So where do we want to be in 5 years from now, for instance, and how do we get there? So you need to have proper information to navigate the situation and take the right decisions in your company or in your administration, in your government.
Information, connection, making sure that you uncover, in fact, more than the classical, easy, accessible data.
Use untraditional sources of information. So open sources is a huge pot of information in today's world.
So Jürgen, you've been describing, in fact, a dashboard, control tower. So what should we focus on? How do we focus on something that really helps us to move on those topics and to identify the right risk?
I mean, consider this dashboard is getting bigger and bigger, because to address the complexity of today's world, you need to receive and collect information from very different views and very different sources of information. So you need to make sure that you get all the internal information from your various units, but you also need on your dashboard, let's say, information that comes from outside sources. Might concern the political situation in your country, might concern new technological developments, might concern any other political topic of relevance, something that is going on around the world, but that might have impact on your company. And make sure you are compiling all this information to be available for your decision making. This is the right thing to do, so that for the right decision for your company, you are collecting and preparing, analyzing the right set of information. That's the challenge.
Now, if we go back 1 second, because we are discussing about new threats. We are discussing about new risks which are coming. So how should corporations reassess their threat models beyond the classical traditional conflicts? What would be basically the key elements where you would suggest corporations to really invest beyond those what we call classical and conventional conflicts, for which we already have, I would say, quite a lot of threat models which are existing, but we all see that it's not sufficient today. So what would be your advice there?
I mean, reconsider your risk management system. Make sure that you are using the diversity of sources of information. Make sure you are in contact, you exchange with non-traditional partners who might have important information available for your business, how to navigate the uncertainty, and make sure you have a comprehensive understanding what risk means. Because risk means, again, perhaps the political situation, geopolitical situation, new technologies coming up, political developments in different parts of the world, and so on and so on. So this all adds to the complexity, but means you have to adapt your risk management system in your organization in a comprehensive way. And maybe the most important point, if you are a CEO, if you are a board member, if you are head of a governmental agency, consider that this should be your top priority number one. So risk is not something you can delegate to a kind of chief risk officer. Having such a function is important, but never forget that this is your main responsibility as a CEO, as a board member, and make sure you have the right cockpit with the right information.
What are the examples and key threads that you see from leaders that basically make a difference? And what should we retain from them?
What I think what the right level of leadership is in today's complex world is a leader needs to be a strong communicator, and a leader needs to be a strong team player. That means communicator, team player within your own system, your own company, your own administration, not just saying, I have a communications department, my communications partner is doing the job to communicate internally. No, it's your responsibility first and foremost to ensure that there is dialogue going on within your company, for instance. Team player refers to the point that no company, of course, is existing in isolation. Every company has a set of contacts, whether it's a supply chain, but also other partners that are relevant, for instance, to collect the necessary information for decision making. Go to other places, be open for dialogue, listen, and take that into consideration in your own decision making, and make sure that within your whole company you have that mindset of being open, receive, consider, analyze, and make this the basis for hopefully good decisions for your company or your administration. So communication, tolerance for other positions, openness, cultural openness.
It's not only a matter of risk manager. It's not only a matter of a chief risk officer to basically look at those risks. Yeah. And I would say that clearly, in fact, making sure that the resilience of the organization is the core and at the center of all what we do.
Maybe in the past we have been considering them as silos, isolated functions within your company. You had somebody who was taking care of IT-related risks, a CISO, for instance, and you had maybe somebody who was taking care of other risks on market, economical situation, political situation in certain parts of the world, depending where your business is. Today, we have to see it in a comprehensive way because these risks are all interlinked with each other. And that is the new complexity. And that means crack your silos, integrate this information, bring it together, do the necessary analysis, and that leads to an understanding by following such a comprehensive approach, such a holistic approach.
And if we go back to the complexity and the scale of the new risk, one of the immediate questions we have is around the supply chain and the impact on the supply chain. And this is something which probably comes at a much bigger level than what we ever had before. So again, on that specific topic, how do you think organizations can prepare themselves to really better analyze the impact of those crises on their supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point because perhaps traditionally, if we were talking about IT security, our focus was on our own company and not that much on supply chain. That has been fundamentally changing because we have seen if your supply chain is a weak link, your company is under threat. before you enter into a contract with a supplier, you must ensure that you have a full understanding what possible risks might be and what your partner is doing to mitigate or reduce these risks at all. Otherwise, you will become a target, not directly, but through the supply chain. And we have plenty of examples where particularly big companies who have been investing a lot in cybersecurity were hit through the supply chain because a small, medium-sized enterprise did not invest in the same way in IT security, and the big company was targeted through the supply chain. So this is a major point that needs to be taken into consideration. So it's a very good point.
We've talked a lot about information, data, making sure that we collect information. How do we move from getting signals, whether they are weak or strong signals, and move into a decision-making and an auditable decision-making? Because at the end of the day, decisions which are taken based on risk need also to be auditable and needs to lead to actions, but actions that basically are clear. So what would be your advice there?
I mean, first of all, again, it's collecting this necessary comprehensive set of information, doing the necessary intelligence work in your company or with your partners. Make sure you have these different perspectives in terms of assessing the information. So what is my interpretation of the information I've been receiving, and then translate these information into a decision-making kind of tool. So make sure you are asking yourself, your leadership team, the right questions. And I know from many discussions I have had with CEOs, with board members, that many, in fact, are still struggling with this complexity and try to find avenues where to get the information, how to, again, change that information into a proposal for a certain decision. So some are using a diverse advisory board with people from very different backgrounds and helping, analyzing and preparing decisions. Others are using other sources of information. But again, I think this is a challenge for all business leaders or politicians in today's world, heads of public administrations, to deal with this complexity.
You were mentioning earlier during this conversation the fact that crises happening at a faster pace. So what would be, if we were to identify it, what would be the right momentum to move from information to decision, to move, in fact, into that sort of discussions? Because having a discussion on a risk, when the risk is materialized, it's too late.
I mean, on the one hand, reacting definitely is too late very often. It can have catastrophic consequences. On the other hand, prediction has its limits. There's the saying, prediction is difficult, particularly if it concerns the future. You know that. But you can be prepared at least for different possible scenarios. So something might develop in direction A, B, C, D, and you want to be prepared for all these different options. Again, we have plenty of examples in the past at political level. Nobody predicted that the Berlin Wall would come down, despite all the information that was available at that time. So unpredictability is one of the challenges, but you can also prepare for that by just being prepared for different possible outcomes. That is very important. The speed in which we experience change obviously is increasing. Technology, one of these examples, where now generative AI just came out. I mean, it's a technology that is existing for quite a while, but the changes, the next innovation steps are coming in shorter and shorter periods. Political changes, we have been experiencing them in very short term and to somehow unpredictable. So it's not something that you can put on your agenda every now and then or once a year. You need to change your leadership mindset in a way that it's a constant part of your leadership activity, constantly receiving information, assessing that against your current decisions you are taking right now and you want to take tomorrow, but make sure that if you are representing a company, the leaders of this company are involved in these discussions, and the whole team in a company is being involved, because every unit, every employee in a company has a role to play in helping getting the right information and preparing the right decisions. No doubt about that.
So you're mentioning and you're insisting on this collaborative aspect, the fact that we need to involve more and more people internally and externally. And to a certain extent, I suspect that Interpol DNA is precisely to connect and to interconnect, in fact, different services around the globe. But if we go back and if we bring it to organizations like us, how would insurance companies, corporates, law enforcement agencies could collaborate differently and more efficiently?
People very often think that police is the agency dealing with crime. Police cannot do it in isolation. So if you work in a police organization, whether it's on national level or international level, you very quickly learn that you cannot fix anything in isolation. Again, it starts with receiving the information from a member of the public that he or she has been becoming a victim of crime. If there is no report, police is blindsided and cannot take any action. If you are not receiving information regarding a perpetrator, in the past, in the physical world, after, let's say, a bank robbery, information from victims, information from witnesses, you have no idea where to find the perpetrators. In the digital world now, a lot of information, of course, sits with the private sector. Big IT security companies, for instance, who are monitoring the complex threat situation. So without information exchange between public sector, private sector, we are not able, let's say, to reduce crime or to fix crime or to solve crime or to prevent crime. For instance, very interesting, I read your very recently published new risk report. What we currently still see to a huge degree is that these agencies or organizations are operating separately from each other. The challenge is to connect these islands of information in both ways. Of course, based on a clear legal framework, because nobody wants to face liability risks if there is not a proper legal framework. Perhaps it's the most important point and links to what I said a little bit earlier in terms of information is key. And secondly, information that sits on different islands of information. Let's use that picture. And these islands of information, for instance, a big global insurance company and a national international police service, these islands need to be connected. Too often, it's still a one-way street. Police likes to have the information from private sector partners, but cannot give something back because of data protection concerns, limits, and we need the community on global level, regional level, to develop the necessary legal framework to allow this information to flow in both directions, because only then both sides can take benefit and you really achieve something together. And together is a key term in not only fighting crime in today's world, but to deal with all these global problems.
So what you're touching here are in fact a few different elements. There is obviously to make sure that we have the legal framework to operate together. There is also a leadership and a cultural change which are attached to that. Yeah. And basically you're analyzing.
Which is not making things easier, right? So absolutely. I'm coming from an environment where very often, I know in the early stages of my police career, we were protecting our information, even amongst colleagues. We were saying, no, this is my information. I want to have that success in getting this criminal behind bars. I'm not sharing it with my colleague. So that can happen within a police agency. Now think about global level. Countries need to share information. Services, police, intelligence community need to share. And now I'm saying private sector and police. I was working a lot in Interpol to build these bridges between partners. But that is a long-term effort because it's exactly as you said, it's a cultural issue. It requires a change in mindset, but it also requires the legal framework to protect those who are taking the decisions. So indeed, that is a comprehensive challenge. And this is why we are only making on a global scale little progress step by step to capture the complexity of today's crime as another global problem the world is having, and to reduce, I'm not saying to eliminate these types of crime, organized crime, international terrorism, cybercrime, financial crime, and so on, all complex issues, but at least to be in a position to push these criminals and terrorists back. Nobody can do that in isolation. One example in Interpol, where we have been working with, at the end, 13 big IT security companies, at least exchanging threat information, not personal related information, but at least threat information. So what is the new pattern of attack that is coming up in Asia? Because this pattern of attack will be in Europe tomorrow and vice versa. And more shifting into a kind of, I would call that institutionalized cooperation in terms of joint centers. In Singapore, because of online crime, scams, fraud, the company decided already a couple of years ago to bring under one umbrella, under one roof, representatives from police, regulators, telecommunication providers, financial sector, banking system, fintech companies, and so on. Why? To meet the dynamics of online fraud, online scams, where millions and millions of people have become victims. And then the money, the illicit proceeds of crime are being brought out of the country within seconds, or even it's not money any longer, it's cryptocurrency, for instance. So to meet the dynamics and speed of this criminal activity, the government of Singapore decided to bring all these agencies under one roof, allow for instant collection and exchange of information, and in real time taking decisions to identify the victim, hopefully identify the perpetrator, hopefully track and trace the illicit proceeds of crime before they cross the border of Singapore. If they have already crossed the border of Singapore, call Interpol, because this is your partner to go after criminals abroad. And this is an extremely successful role model from my point of view to consider doing that also in other parts of the world. So instead of remaining in our silos, but to build bridges between these silos and ideally bring all these people together. If they work together every day, we are developing trust. Nobody should underestimate the importance of trust in these relations. And then we can take the appropriate decision. That is a role model for me to address the complexity of today's threats.
What is the risk of not sharing within the organization?
An example from my environment, a risk for not sharing information simply means you will not be in a position to dismantle the complexity of a criminal network. So taking wrong decisions. And the same in the business environment. If you are not sharing, you risk to take decisions that are not meeting the complexity of today's work, simply meaning you are not successful in achieving your goals and following your strategy. So at the end, not being successful as a leader and as a company.
What I find fascinating in what you are describing is the fact that, in fact, when we observe what happens in the criminal part of the activity, there is these networks that are created, the speed and so on. And in fact, to be able to face them and to be able, in fact, to fight against, we need to create similar kind of intensity, similar kind of velocity in the connectivity that we might have between the different actors which are over there. Do you believe that we are really progressing beyond, in fact, some specific elements and the key example that you have given us?
First of all, criminals, unfortunately, are faster than we are. The big kind of gangs, cartels, call them, are organized like a professional global enterprise with the same level of professionalism, collecting information, where are the weak spots in international police or judicial cooperation, and we can see diversification of their criminal activity. We can clearly see that the most dangerous criminal gangs and cartels are still expanding across the globe. We can clearly see cooperation between these gangs, where in the past we have seen fights. We see crime as a service, specialization of criminal groups. So one group specializing on money laundering with cryptocurrency, another group specializing on counterfeited travel documents, for instance. The underground economy, they are using nicknames. They have a special rating. So if their criminal service has been shown successfully, they get a AAA, let's say, and offers us their services. This is the new threat level. So organization in a very professional way. Are we still there in global law enforcement? of course, the current geopolitical tensions, the different legal frameworks around the world, the different level of resources, skilled police officers, is not necessarily making it easier to build that global network of law enforcement against the global networks of crime, of organized crime and cybercrime. But too often, law enforcement work, international judicial cooperation is still characterized by fragmentation, a lack of resources, a lack of legal framework, a lack of trust, and therefore there's still a huge advantage, let's say, for those criminal groups who are operating across continents. And that is the reality of today's threat landscape.
Well, and this is where we need to react faster then.
We have to be much faster. We have to understand, and now with new technologies coming up, faster and faster. And criminals, of course, immediately being in a position to test these new technologies. Now, the whole area of artificial intelligence, agentic AI, so autonomously operating AI agents. So criminals have already been starting testing and using this new technology much faster than diplomats are operating, governments are operating, police is operating. We are allocating the necessary resources. We are providing the right training. We hire the experts on the open market, IT experts to work within the police service. That all takes time. But we do not have that time. Again, we already had big cyber attacks 2015, 2016, 2017, affecting hundreds of thousands of computers at the same time in 150 countries. So this is not the right speed to address a problem that is a kind of revolution. During the pandemic, we spoke about a parallel pandemic of crime. So the clear answer is, do we have to get faster? Clearly, yes. That means much more also public discussion. Of course, the world currently, we have a lot of topics to be discussed. Global economy, conflict, geopolitical tensions, and so on and so on. Lots of topics for politicians and societies to be discussed. Unfortunately, organized crime, cybercrime, international terrorism should be at the same list, should also be discussed. Where are we and what do we need to do as societies within the European Union and globally with organizations like Interpol to strengthen our fight against these type of crime? Because it is having impact on our society. We see in many countries level of violence on the street increasing, and I'm talking about Western countries. And we see in many countries in the Western world, police chiefs raising the alarm and saying organized crime increasingly is infiltrating our societies and the legal economy. That is in the same way destabilizing our Western societies. Nobody should underestimate that.
Now, the question everybody probably have in mind right now, in your opinion, what is the next biggest risk that will happen? Or maybe to the other end, what is the low, I would say, probability risk to happen, but with a big impact that you're expecting?
So the big thing currently definitely is artificial intelligence. Where are we going with artificial intelligence? The genie is out of the box, no question. The technology is available. You know, the spectrum is from some people saying this is the end of the world. We will kill ourselves as human beings. And the others are saying, no, this will lead to huge prosperity and well-being and economical development. And artificial intelligence will help us eliminating the risks. So obviously undecided amongst experts. Point of concern for me is that, from my point of view, security by design risks falling, I think in English we say, under the bus. So why is that? There is a kind of race who is first on the market with artificial intelligence solutions. And what, from a law enforcement perspective, perhaps, or a cybersecurity perspective, would be required is, if you bring a new product on the market, make sure that you are meeting minimum security requirements. So that is the reason for the current cybersecurity crisis we are in, that our system is built on vulnerable software in an IT system. Of course, the need to be fast, but our world increasingly becoming really a hyper-connected world. Every element of our life being connected to the internet, including our health and what have you, our cars, everything, our children, ourselves. Unprecedented opportunities for criminals to attack us if we are not establishing at least a minimum level of security by design, if we are not raising awareness about the risks for our children, ourselves, our grandparents, our companies, our administrations. So that for me perhaps currently is the biggest and a really concrete threat that we are producing in a digital, hyper-connected world on the one hand, and huge opportunities and technical tools for criminals to attack us in a kind of industrial scale, in a dimension I have never seen in my long career before. Good old times where we still had physical crime scenes, where a perpetrator had to go or to travel to a bank for a bank robbery. That was high risk and relatively low profit. Today it's the other way around. We have relatively low risk for cyber criminals particularly, but also organized crime groups, and we have high, huge astronomical profits. And we have not been yet talking about critical infrastructures, the vulnerability of our critical infrastructure. We have plenty of examples in Europe from the last couple of months. Not always cyber attacks, also arson attacks and other incidents where we saw the huge impact, we saw the vulnerabilities of our systems, water supply, electricity, airports, and so on, with minimum effort, a huge impact on the functioning of our societies. So here sits a number of significant risks. And on the other hand, we are struggling as nation states at a regional level and at a global level how to deal with that. We are struggling with regulation. Some people say regulation should never kill innovation. Okay. Others are saying, no, we cannot let that go without any regulation. The risks are too high. Criminals are having all the resources they need to invest in new technologies, to test them. Of course, they are not law-abiding by nature, I would like to say. And on the other hand, we have diplomats, politicians, regulators, and police agencies struggling with this unprecedented development, because this is really a very different world from the world, let's say, where I come from when I was a young police officer, the traditional crime in the physical world.
So it's a disproportionate consequences of an action that exposes to a lower extent, in fact, the perpetrator, and the fact that the protection needs to move up the entire chain from the manufacturer of the systems and the infrastructure to the users.
It's a truly globalized criminal world. No doubt about that. And we never had that situation before, that so easily from your home in any part of the world with the internet access, you can attack a critical infrastructure. But also sending the threat into your home. When I was a young police officer, our home, our company was considered a relatively safe space. In today's world, the threat is coming into your jacket where your mobile phone is. It's reaching your children in their children's room. It is reaching your company and your critical infrastructure from anywhere in the world. And with artificial intelligence, increasingly industrial scale. So in the past, a bank robber had to go from bank to bank to bank to bank. In today's world, from ATM machine to be blown up to the next ATM machine, to the next ATM machine with all the risks. Already today, the criminals are using, let's say, agentic AI, like somebody sitting on your shoulder, a robot sitting on your shoulder, a criminal autopilot, in conducting the whole criminal supply chain on your behalf. So the robot doing the social engineering, trying to find out who is that person, what kind of information is available online, his photos, speech for any deep fakes, where are the weak spots in a company's IT security system. All this can be done industrial scale from anywhere in the world. And that is a new dimension, completely new dimension.
To close, if you were to leave our audience with 3 moves to put in place and to really focus on, what would they be?
I mean, first of all, check where you are with your organization, with your companies. Get your people to the table. Ask them the question, where are we in terms of assessing and understanding our risks internally? Make sure that there is a comprehensive understanding around all those who have to contribute in terms of what do we mean by risk? What do we mean by a comprehensive approach? The second advice is that you are cultivating a kind of mindset of awareness, not only at the senior level, but within your organization by establishing a kind of dialogue with everyone in your company. And everyone means everyone, because everyone has a role to play in terms of this understanding of risks and of means to reduce and to mitigate the risks. And thirdly, assess your partners in terms of your business partners. We spoke about supply chain earlier, so that you have this comprehensive view and understand and assess whom should you be partner with, who should be your partners in strengthening your understanding of the risk environment in which you are operating. So these would be my 3 pieces of advice. First, comprehensive understanding. Secondly, make sure you have your team involved. And thirdly, assess the right partnerships to protect your assets, your crown jewels, your company, your administration.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. We now have our checklist.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for joining us on this Ahead of the Risk session today. Please connect to any platform that basically suits you to follow our podcasts, and make sure that you connect to our next sessions as well, because obviously there will be a lot of other very interesting topics.